Vasari, in his Lives of the Artists, recounts a story of the famous Italian artist Giotto and his circle. Pope Benedict sent one of his courtiers into Tuscany to see what sort of a man he was and what his works were like, for the Pope was planning to have some paintings made in St. Peter's. This courtier, on his way to see Giotto and to find out what other masters of painting and mosaic there were in Florence, spoke with many masters in Siena, and then, having received some drawings from them, he came to Florence. And one morning, going into the workshop of Giotto, who was at his labors, he showed him the mind of the Pope, and at last asked him to give him a little drawing to send to His Holiness. Giotto, who was a man of courteous manners, immediately took a sheet of paper, and with a pen dipped in red, fixing his arm firmly against his side to make a compass of it, with a turn of his hand he made a circle so perfect that it was a marvel to see it. Having done it, he turned smiling to the courtier and said, "Here is the drawing." But he, thinking he was being laughed at, asked, "Am I to have no other drawing than this?" "This is enough, and too much," replied Giotto. "Send it with the others, and see if it will be understood." The messenger, seeing that he could get nothing else, departed ill-pleased, not doubting that he had been made a fool of. However, sending the other drawings to the Pope with the names of those who had made them, he also sent Giotto's, relating how he had made the circle without moving his arm and without compasses, which, when the Pope and many of his courtiers understood, they saw that Giotto must surpass greatly all the other painters of his time. A similar story is recounted earlier in history by Pliny the Elder regarding the famous painter Apelles. Apelles was a renowned ancient Greek painter who visited an island and the empty studio of a fellow artist. Apelles drew a perfect circle on the studio wall in lieu of a written note, confident that the circle would prove a virtual signature for his great name. What is the meaning of this story of Giotto's circle? Was it simply that the artist demonstrated his skill in painting a perfect circle through the control of his steady hands? Certainly this impressive feat signifies the artist's skill, a promising skill, well suited for the request of the Pope. Of course, there is something deeply esoteric about the circle that can aid us in our understanding of alchemy, theurgy, and the nature of the cosmos. Because when you look at the alchemical circle, you are looking at a form of the divine. This circle is a god. This is a goddess. Not one particular manifestation of a god or goddess, but a geometric representation of their dynamis. According to Iamblichus and other later Neoplatonists, the n-cosmic, or visible gods, show their activities in the generative realm without having to descend into the generative realm. Furthermore, they can impart knowledge of cosmic cycles, and through human contemplation of the gods' self-enclosed natures, their sphericity helps the contemplating soul bring about its own movements in accordance with the cosmic order. The symbol of the circle is so incredibly ancient, it would be nearly impossible and senseless to try to pinpoint a precise moment in which it entered the human imagination and governed our understanding of reality. We could look for prehistoric cave paintings, but the origins of the circle will always reside in the dark, misty regions of the unconscious. The symbol of the circle presents us with the alchemical declaration of one, the all. It is easy for us moderns to look at symbols and perceive them as static, immobile representations, somewhat like a picture or a still image. But we must recall that symbols are perpetually in motion. They rotate, they have a life of their own, and they abide by the dynamic laws inherent to their structures. There is a necessity that all symbols adhere to, their ananke. Let us look a little closer at the dynamics of the circle. Here within the symbol of the circle, multiplicity is expanded outward and forward in a creative generation, either conceptualized as a clockwise movement or a counterclockwise movement. As an enclosed representation, it really makes no difference which direction you travel. while as a whole it retains its stability and self-sameness, that oneness that is spoken of, a unity. What is a circle if not a line that loops and reverts back upon itself? And you might ask, why does it do that? What are the invisible forces that form a line into a circle? Where does circular motion arise from? We can think of centripetal and centrifugal forces. René Guénon, in his Symbols of Sacred Science, spoke of the circle as the wheel with an axis. The spokes that emerge from the center of the circle represent a movement from the infinitesimally small and indivisible point, representing the Godhead or the divine origin of the All, toward the outward movement or emanation of all manifested beings and things in the periphery of the circle. This would be the sensation or centrifugal force that moves outward from the center, where differentiation reigns supreme and all is multiple and confused in the phenomenal realm. The centripetal force, meanwhile, is the pull of all things in the periphery of manifestation, the world we inhabit, the prayerful movement of all creatures, plants, stones, toward the center of their being, the eros and desire that compels the human being back to his or her source. Contrary to the expectation that all manifestation emerges from the center as an emanation, the circle and its movement does not seem to make a lot of sense. How can something revolve if it is simply emanating outwards indefinitely? The spokes would stretch outward to infinity, and no circularity would result. It would be one indivisible point in space. Therefore, we need to introduce the outside periphery. In essence, we need to limit the unlimited. The peras must be applied to the aperon. If we do not abide by our limitations as human beings, we risk excess and imbalance, and hence provide no suitable receptacle for the divine to manifest itself. In fact, the ancient Greek word gnosis, or disease, is precisely understood as a result of the unlimited. It is a body or soul that is no longer living in balance or under the principles of harmony. A disease, either mental or physical, can be understood as a response to a real imbalance. It's compensation. Just as Jung believed that psychic neuroses are natural ways for the psyche to compensate and redress energic imbalances. Imagine a person who does anything and everything they want, with no regard to restrictions, boundaries, does not contain or temper their emotions, their ambitions, drives, pleasures, fears, a completely unbounded entity. The best way to depict that person geometrically would be a solid, unbroken line, a straight, unbroken line heading off God knows where. But of course, limitation is imposed on us, so nobody exists without the fetters of restriction. Our bodies limit us as well. Hence the ancient equation of soma, meaning body, with sema, which means tomb. But you can begin to see that the only thing that curbs the passions of the unbounded in the human being is the limit. And just as in calculus, the line slowly approaches the limit but never actually reaches its axis completely. Therefore it begins to curve, running parallel alongside it, and never touching it. If we apply the four axes and contain this force of the unbounded movement, you will see the curve rotating in 360 degrees. What has happened here? It is precisely when the unlimited being becomes limited that the circular movement emerges. The center is always invisibly there. It is sometimes described by Iamblichus as the Hesiodic chaos, but there it is atopos, it is a non-place. But in a strange way it appears to me that circular movement and the actualization, if you will, of God, the God becoming cognizant of himself, self-aware of himself through his creation, is only brought about from the periphery where the creature resides. As Böhme once said, in order to know the origin of the stars or the beginning, you must understand the origin of life and how life originates in the body, because in everything there is only one origination. I am, of course, familiar with the saying of Hermes Trismegistus that God is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. But this may apply to reality as such, in which all things are embedded within all other things. However, in this particular instance, we are fixing a symbol, keeping it contained within our field of vision, and observing the dynamic movements of circularity in isolation. One of the most widely disseminated symbols of alchemy is the Uroboros. Again, with the snake, part of its mystical properties is of its regenerative nature. The snake sloughs off its outer layers, and yet somehow remains the same snake as it was before, while also being somehow different, something transformed. It is also important to see the circle as a self-contained entity. It is a vessel where the operation of alchemy takes place, because it is not only the location of the operation, but the operational process itself. By closing in upon itself, the vessel becomes hermetically sealed. No alchemical work can be performed unless the vessel is completely shut and self-contained. In a way, it requires the pressure, like a pressure cooker, to convert the substances and transmute them. But how does the shape of the circle and its movement relate to the alchemical work? Whether we are considering transmutation, dissolving, coagulating, fixing, etc., what is being discussed is an act of poiesis. It is a fabrication, a making, a production. But just like the artisan who makes a bespoke, custom-made shoe, there is always going to be an image of the shoe to begin with. Even if the image is not drawn on a piece of paper, it is there in the cobbler's mind. It exists as a model or as a paradigm. Therefore, everything that the cobbler or artisan creates is brought about through a mimesis of the original template. The real-life shoe becomes an image of the thought that produced it. But the shoe, or painting, or poem, or the integrated alchemical subject is fully beautiful when the image produced and crafted approximate as closely as possible to the paradigm from which it was fashioned, so that the thought form or paradigm that begun the process reaches backward or forward and overlays one on top of the other in a circular fashion and finally merges with its image. In essence, this means that beauty is the shining forth of the paradigm through the image that is created. In true circular fashion, the beginning is simultaneously the end. Hence, Alcmaeon of Crotona's famous statement that I'm so fond of repeating, "Men perish because they cannot join the beginning to the end." Now, this of course does not mean that you don't have to do anything because before you start, you've already completed everything. No, certainly not. On a certain level of being that's perhaps outside of time and space and consciousness, perhaps that is true, but not in the world of embodiment. The movement of the cosmos is as a revolving gyre, whereby you arrive at the same position as in the beginning, albeit at a different level of knowing and experience. Many of us have the sensation or presentiment of having experienced the same life difficulty emerging in different forms or similar forms as we get older. Let's say a conflict with a sibling. We may year after year experience the same specific conflict, but hopefully, as we gain in knowledge and wisdom, and encounter others and ourselves through the alchemical work and through integration, we begin to perceive new connections that were not apparent to us before, new techniques for dealing with the same problems, a new understanding, or perhaps even a different perspective on the world and of our sibling. So although the external event may be manifest similarly or follow a particular pattern, we are arriving at the same point through a different level of gnosis or comprehension. We bring something different to the situation, and therefore emerge as different forms of the snake that has sloughed off its old skins. As Agrippa states in his De Occulta Philosophia, no one can excel in the alchemical art without knowing the principles in himself, and the greater the knowledge of the self, the greater will be the magnetic power attained thereby, and the greater the wonders to be realized. It is not a coincidence that this circular movement of life, with its recurring difficulties, is somehow related to the circular nature of time. The oneness of the circle as a self-contained entity that rotates upon itself endlessly is what can be referred to as ion. Ion has many translations, including an age, like the Middle Ages, or a generation, like the millennial generation, one's own lifetime, from birth to death. Shockingly, it can also refer to cerebrospinal fluid. I will definitely have to make a specific video on that at a later date. However, in this particular instance, we will talk about its definition as eternity. Eternity is not the same as what St. Augustine termed eternitas, which is the never-ending extension of temporality, an eternal presence where time continues onwards forever. Eternity is the remaining one and the same with itself, the perpetually self-same. The heavenly cycles that we observe in astrological calculations, diagrammatically presented as the natal chart for each person, depict the ordered movements of what is known as the heavenly vault, also known as Uranus, or the sensible universe. These heavens, which include the sun, the moon, and the wandering planets, move in revolutions, always reverting back to their original positions. As God makes the heaven, simultaneously parts are divided and days, nights, months, years all emerge, which also rotate. The cosmic soul already exists in ordered movements that are derived from number, and it is by making the stars and planets orbit in their preset revolutions that a visible image is created of this invisible cosmic force. Once again, this all occurs in conformity with number. A cosmos cannot come into being without ordered movement, and for ordered movement, this necessitates the presence of number. Jung defined number in a psychological manner as, quote, an archetype of order which has become conscious. If we were not conscious of number, the cosmic soul would remain imperceivable to us. Numbers emerge at that moment or that liminal space where the divine and the human touch, emerging in geometric or mathematical form. This place is where time and eternity meet. If we consider the heavenly vault or Uranus as the emerging, visible representation of time reflected by the cosmic soul, we can safely say that number exists in this realm. The moment the planetary movements collapse, so does day, month, year, and in fact, all of time. They are coterminous and exist together as two sides of the same coin. In a very real way, our entire being is enclosed in a loop. We are moving back to ourselves, our true selves. We, in fact, are the images, continually adjusting and molding ourselves into conformity with our higher self. but our real paradigms are our celestial counterparts, the angels of our being, those entities that we slowly approximate and become with their guidance, returning our outward movement in the periphery back to the center of our being, where together, conjoined with our angelic intelligences, we move as a celestial double and are brought closer and closer as a syzygy back up the spokes of the hierarchy of being to the divine center itself. If the world of manifestation applies to the periphery of the circle or wheel, the world of strife, joy, disorder, turmoil, life, death, love, pain, and all the manifold things underneath the sublunary realm, where time and motion rules and things generated are born and then decay and die, then motionlessness is the resultant effect, barely perceptible and incomprehensible. Utter stillness. Complete stillness is incomprehensible because the nature of thought participates in movement. Earlier, we mentioned the dynamic movement of the symbol of the wheel with the spokes. The symbol of the chariot wheel was articulated by both Parmenides and Empedocles. The paradox at the heart of their message is that motionlessness is attained through motion. Motionlessness and stillness is not the opposite or contrary of motion. It is in fact its acceleration. The kyklon is the ancient chariot wheel, and behind this image of the kyklon is the binding or conjoining of its parts. If you recall in an earlier video, the goddess associated with the magical powers of binding were none other than Aphrodite herself, the goddess of beauty and deception. In his proem, Parmenides' ecstatic and shamanic journey culminates in a state of utter stillness, but it is only through the increasing revolution of the kykloi that carry him there that such stillness is attained. Similarly, Empedocles states that his four rhizomata, or elements, earth, air, water, fire, are in a constant state of flux, ever shifting and transforming. Specifically, he declares that they are, quote, motionless through the kyklon. Later on, in the Timaeus, the Kora, the receptacle of generation, who maintains a sense of stability, harbors and nurtures the four elements. However, none of the elements remain the same or constant. Their perpetual and ceaseless fleeing, phaige, resist all efforts to assign names to them. Even adjectives like that, tode, or this, tutto. Therefore, they are constantly eluding the designation of names and words. They are constantly eluding the power of the logos. For fear of giving away too much, let me briefly state that the spinning of the kyklon or chariot wheel and its relation to the deceptiveness of the goddess is the core mystical realization. As long as you concentrate effectively, the faster the wheel spins, the quicker and more intricate becomes the deception. But hold on to that movement and let yourself embrace the deception, and the faster and faster it spins, the closer you will approach the truth. Take care for now.